You know what time it is, no matter where you've been. So let's do it again. Listen up and let the sun shine in. We've got soul training. Time to practice what you preach. Ooh, yeah. Yes, we do. We've got soul training.
You know, one of the great things I like about working with you all is you're constantly helping me raise my game. And I always view Daniel as the top of the heap, the lion in the jungle when it comes to dad jokes. So I heard one the other day, and I've been sitting on this for 2 weeks. I wanted to share
Okay, bring
with
it
you.
on.
All right, here you go. Do you know why the basketball court was wet?
Why's that?
Because the players dribbled.
That's terrible.
That is
No, that's a good one. They actually, you can go, I think, fatherhood.com or something and find the dad jokes. I think. Don't Google that yet. I need to verify that. But I thought there was another one. I can't remember that one. I can only remember one at a time.
Well, I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah. You like? I know
he won't be sharing it,
Yeah.
but he appreciates you sharing
I
it
can
with
tell.
him.
I can tell it doesn't. It didn't impress you as much as I thought it would.
No, I'm very impressed.
Well, here's what I know about Daniel's dad joke philosophy: is it's got to be a spur of the moment type of thing. You gotta sneak it in there. You can't preface it with, "Hey, I want to tell you a dad joke." So you broke two rules right there. It's just got to be something off the cuff and stated quickly.
Well, I'm not wearing long sleeves today. See, how's that?
There you go. So we can't do it off the cuff.
See, that's
There's
right.
no cuffs to
That's
be
right.
off of.
Yeah, that was better than the last one. You're getting there.
Yeah, nobody, everybody likes sausage, but nobody likes to watch it being made. So it's a process, just like dad jokes. We'll go ahead and get started. We don't want anybody to suffer any longer. Today we're going to talk with we need to advertise this and push this, that we had a dear listener who reached out to us with a question that she wanted us to talk about and address. And I'd have to go back and look at it word for word, but it just simply says, basically, what role do the Sadducees and Pharisees continue to play in our modern day lives? And I never thought about it like that. So I thought it was a really, really good question. And I think it's okay to share that Daniel provided us with a resource, with an article to so we can all be on the same page, literally and figuratively and conversationally, but about someone who wrote an article, and he talked about how hurtful the word Pharisee is to him. And I never thought about that, but it did make me think about we need to be careful because words do matter. They really do. And I've been guilty of misusing words and definitely mispronouncing, but labeling people when I shouldn't have. And I think that's what this writer talks about too. So I think that's kind of the idea is, I go back to our dear listener's question, how have the Sadducees and Pharisees impacted our lives and continue to do so by them just being them?
When you talk about people calling each other names, people don't call each other Sadducee that much, but Pharisee is a term that really gets thrown around. And I think usually when people call somebody else a Pharisee, they're meaning to call them a hypocrite, they're meaning to call them legalistic, they're usually meaning to imply that, these are the old fogies that are in charge that won't let the young cool people do what they want to do because they're too pharisaical. But really, if we understand the Pharisees and the Sadducees in the Bible, I think a lot of our preconceptions about them are actually off. And maybe when we call somebody a Pharisee, it doesn't mean what we think it means. So let's go back and think first about who the Sadducees and Pharisees were. During the time between the New Testament and the Old Testament, there's like 400 years of history, so a lot of things take place then. And one of the things that takes place is you have these kind of social political parties that develop. You've got some of the ones that, from the biblical perspective, are a little more minor, not the less important, but they don't play as a big role in the Bible. You've got like the Essenes. The Essenes, we talked about them in our Qumran Dead Sea Scrolls episode, so we can do a little cross buzz there. If you missed that episode with Bart Warren, it was a good one. Go back and check it out in our back catalog, and learn a little bit about the Essenes. Their they're these hardcore guys. They're kind of like, think John the Baptist. Some people think he might have been in Essing. And then you've got guys like the Zealots, and there's Simon the Zealot is one of the apostles, and the Zealots are kind of a fanatical group. They want to rise up and rebel against the Romans, kick the Romans out through violent means, whatever is necessary. That's sort of their take on things. And then you've got the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and these two groups are more prominent in the New Testament for us. The Sadducees are kind of more practical. See, if we're thinking about the difference between the Sadducees and the Pharisees, think the Sadducees are kind of culturally liberal, but they're actually religiously very conservative. And what I mean by that is culturally they're liberal. They were the ones that they're kind of the party of the elite, and they're the ones that are they're willing to play nice with the Romans. Whoever's in charge, they'll buddy up to them so they can have political power as well. And so that's kind of their approach. They're fine with Hellenization that was taking place. But religiously, they're actually very, very conservative. If they were, we use terms thinking about Supreme Court justices, originalist versus those that view the Constitution as a living Constitution. Well, if you were viewing the Old Testament that way, if you were viewing the Torah that way, the Sadducees would be the originalist. They would be the ones saying the Torah says what it says, it means what it means, we're not adding any tradition to it. It is what it is. They're going to interpret it very literally. That's something that a lot of people really don't understand about the Sadducees. We sort of think about them as being secular because they don't believe in the resurrection, and we think about how they have a reputation of being corrupt. They're not the party of the people. They're the elite, so they're not very popular among the average man. But then the Pharisees are taking the opposite role. They are politically conservative, but actually religiously liberal or progressive. Yeah, that's right. So politically, they are against Hellenization. They want to keep the Jewish ways and maintain those sorts of things. They are willing to kind of play ball with the Romans. They're sort of practical in that mindset, but they want to fight against Hellenization. But they're going to take more of that living constitution approach to the Torah. And they are going to view the Torah as something that actually can be adjusted and supplemented with their traditions, adapted for the times by their traditions.
I will just, as I listen to, that's a wonderful description, by the way, a little, I feel like a really good summary of kind of catches up to speed, especially that 400 years of history. But I can't help but think and I'm not making fun or making light at all, but I can help but think in the last few years or in my lifetime, how many people want to protest and pull from one side to the other, and they act like it's kind of their idea. It's the first time. We're the first group of people that ever have thought this way or done this way, but it's not. They're probably the 20th generation. They're way behind the times, really. I think about what you described with people being politically conservative, but yet religiously maybe liberal, or have those switched a little bit. So I guess for me, I go back to the dear listener's question: is we're being impacted by that behavior and thought even today, by the people getting away from what Christ preaches or what we're following. So I feel like that, and for me, that would be one of the first big answers. Is I feel like that we are still clinging on to the way that thought of the Sadducees and the Pharisees, that tug of war, you might say.
Well, the Sadducees. The Pharisees, quite literally, and not even in a figurative sense, are still impacting the world today. The Sadducees faded out of existence when the Sadducees associate them with the temple, associate the Pharisees with the synagogue. That's an oversimplification, but those are their realms of influence. Well, in AD 70, when the temple is destroyed, the Sadducees and their role and prominence really disappear, and they basically fade out of existence. But the Pharisees and their role of rabbinic teaching and all that sort of thing, their emphasis on the synagogue and their role in the synagogue continues on. And so modern day Orthodox Judaism is, in a lot of ways, kind of the descendant of the Pharisees of the New Testament.
I guess my point I was trying to say, I guess just those attitudes and those mindsets are even still in existence today, both politically and spiritually or religiously too. They kind of draw from that same attitude even then.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Okay. You didn't. Alan's just looking at me. He didn't answer me.
Well, I'm shocked because you run the place. I mean,
No, I don't. But I want to ask a question. In Matthew 23, there's the woes, right? And it's always woe to the scribes and the Pharisees.
Mm-hmm.
Are the scribes Sadducees, or is he leaving them off? Who are the scribes? Where would they fall in this realm?
Many of the scribes would have been Pharisees. So the scribes are the experts in the law. They're the ones studying the law. Sadducees aren't really that closely in view there. The Sadducees show up in the New Testament, but they actually don't conflict with Jesus that often, not as much as the Pharisees do.
Well, and the reason I ask is because there's a whole lot of woes to the Pharisees, but there's not any woes to the Sadducees. And so whenever I read the Bible, I'm thinking, I want to make sure I'm not a Pharisee, because there's a lot of woes to those folks.
There are absolutely. Talking about reason, Alan mentioned that calling somebody a Pharisee is pretty offensive. That's because Jesus has some really strong things to say about Pharisees. He speaks very, very harshly towards them. They're called a brood of vipers. They're called a whitewashed tombs. They're called all this, and some of that is because in their teaching they sort of have an emphasis on the exterior of a religion. And that's something you see throughout the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is constantly saying, you've heard it was said this, but I say this. And the you've heard it was said mostly is the teachings of the Pharisee. So they're talking about them being progressive is an idea that is probably opposite of what everybody thinks about when they think about Pharisees. But for example, how they would interpret the Old Testament instruction about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. The Sadducees would have said, literally, you attack somebody, you cost somebody their eye, the penalty for that is we're going to gouge your eye out. The Pharisees would have said an eye for an eye means the price of an eye. All right, so they're going to more flexible. There's a fine. They're going to figure out how much they think an eye is worth, and you're going to pay the fine as to how much that.
I like the one phrase, the article that you shared with us, that they were known for creating loopholes.
Yes. Oh, the way you put it, the modern Pharisee is one who uses Scripture to create loopholes for himself and nooses for others. Now, since we're directly quoting it, I'll give attribution. This is Wes McAdams that wrote this article about why we probably should stop calling people Pharisees. And one of the things that they were noted for is creating these loopholes, interpreting the law so they could do what they wanted while at the same time restricting the behavior of other people. So a lot of people view those modern-day Pharisees as somebody that believes in strictly following the New Testament, but more accurately, at least in this sense, Wes points out the modern-day Pharisee is someone who twists the Scripture in order to make it say what he wants it to say. So there's a heavy dose of hypocrisy that's involved in being a Pharisee.
What do you all think, like with the hypocrisy? Because I hear people talk about, don't be a hypocrite, or you're a hypocrite, or just, we're even reminded, even as Christians, don't be hypocritical, by our behavior, by our social media posts, and, be consistent and be faithful, but don't be hypocritical. But in 2022, why do you all think that people are still referring to others as Pharisees? They think that the slur is in maybe they're being legalistic, or they're too legalistic, but really they're not.
Well, it seems like a lashing out to me. It's a last-ditch defense, as if this is the way I envision it. If someone is doing something that others don't like, that they find it offensive, and somebody goes up to them, well, they'll justify it by calling the other person a name. That's how I've envisioned it. Daniel, what do you think?
It's dismissive. It's a easy shorthand way to say that what that person has to say and their whole stance doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. They can be dismissed because they're just a Pharisee.
If I'm taking a conservative approach, let's say to music, for example, and if Joe would, the kind of the flipped thinking is that if Joe wanted to put me in my place, Alan, you're just being a Pharisee, thinking that he's referring to me as someone who's very legalistic, but in essence and definition, that he just called me someone who's very flexible and loose, creating loopholes.
Sort of. I don't know that I would call them loose because they are strict. They're very strict in their binding of tradition. But
Or looser, maybe.
People, and I think this is why people think that Pharisees are conservative, is because they are strict. But modern day cancel culture shows you that somebody can be very liberal and still be very strict about the set of beliefs that
certain things you can't do,
certain things you cannot do.
That's the line right there.
Yes, that's
or
right.
Say, you mean say
Or
do?
yeah, well, if you're canceled.
But I don't know. I know that's a whole nother podcast, soul training podcast.
We will do the current culture podcast at some point. If anybody listens, I don't know.
I'm confused at what it would take to get you canceled. I mean,
don't.
I really don't know. I'm not trying to create another show. I'm just
in some places in the world, doing this podcast would get you canceled.
Sure.
Russia, for example, we learned a week or two ago with Sasha. The Russian government is very much orthodox and very anti everything but orthodox, and so we would be canceled in Russia
pretty quick.
Which might explain why we don't have very many listens in Russia.
I just thought maybe the internet was weak or something. It wouldn't get across the big pond. I didn't know.
We're across the pond, but not on that part.
Yeah, so one big aspect to not being a Pharisee is not imposing on other people standards that you don't impose on yourself. So that's a key to saying I'm not a Pharisee, is I hold myself to the same standard or a higher standard than that I hold other people to. So that's going to be key. I guess one way we could approach this conversation is how can we make sure we're not Pharisees? And that would be a good place to start, I think.
I guess I wanted to jump quickly to another point about that Mr. McAdams, or I guess I can call him Wes. I feel like I know him. I read him a lot of stuff he puts out. He talks about that the Pharisees neglected weightier matters, and he cites Matthew 23 through 34, and it simply says, as Joe's already talked about, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise." You might have to help me with pronunciation. "Anise and cumming, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone." For me, I think about, sometimes even in 2022, hopefully we're not like that we pay attention to the whole counsel of God, not just, the big issues and not the little issues, or just the little issues and not the big issues, all those things. But the Pharisees are known for neglecting those weightier matters. I mean, Jesus just said it.
Yeah, that's right. And that's something that we do need to be, as we're being self-reflective, we need to be careful about. Now, Jesus did say that he didn't say the little things didn't matter. He said you should do the little things, but you shouldn't neglect the weightier things in the process. And, don't major in the minors, as it were. So a person can do that. Now, that's just an expression. That wasn't even a joke.
I like it. It's a good one.
You never heard that?
I have, but
Okay.
It tickles me every time.
Every time.
Wow, okay. That's awesome.
Anyway.
I got to come up with a dad joke and something that tickles Joe now.
Good luck.
I lost my train of thought now.
Don't major in the minors.
Majoring in the minors, that's right. We don't want to do that. So, within the church, the big things are the motivations. That was the thing that the Pharisees were getting wrong. As you go back to the Sermon on the Mount and how Jesus describes so much of that, the motivations matter, and so we've got to have that, love, faith, those things that are the engine of the church, and we can't neglect those to where we're just emphasizing all the minor points, the right forms, the right little discussions that can distract away from that. Not that the little things don't matter, but they matter less than the big things.
Well, the kind of what I wanted to springboard into next is you think about being spiritually dead. You mentioned something a few minutes ago that you can be strict, but yet be loose on other things. But to me, it goes back to like mixed messages. When you think about the Pharisees being spiritually dead, Matthew 23, verses 27 through 28, there again, Jesus is saying, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs," which you already referenced earlier, "which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, and inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanliness. Even so, you also outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." And in terms of self-reflection, that's a huge log that hits me, that reminds me that, when I'm out in the world, we all are, and you get caught up in those moments, and we need to make sure that we're not spiritually dead because we're emotionally energized about something, and that's something that I have to balance a little bit. But that's a lesson actually that I go back to the listener's question: how are we being impacted today? Well, I'm being impacted because I don't want to be like that of the Pharisee. So I'm being impacted, but hopefully in a way that I'm learning from the Pharisees, and the fact that I don't want to be. I want to make sure I'm consistent and I'm committed to Christ.
And see, some of the Pharisees were sincere. Some of them did come to Christ. Famously, Paul was a Pharisee. Nicodemus,
I think the
Joseph.
I think the world. When you think about Saul, I think for some reason, and it may just be me, y'all can disagree, but I think the world, when you bring up Saul, they view him as ultra conservative, or ultra, dotting I's and crossing T's. But yet, as I learn more about the Pharisees, that it's not. He's not as much as people think.
Well, he does have a lot to say about the law and grace. You read Romans and Galatians, both have a tremendous amount to say about that. And I don't want to leave the wrong impression that the Pharisees definitely were meticulous. They were very detail-oriented. I wouldn't say they didn't cross I's and dot T's. I would say just the opposite. They were all about crossing I's and dotting T's. It's just the I's and T's were created by their tradition. And tradition could be adapted and grow. And you had all these layers of tradition that had taken on the weight of law to protect that core in the middle of the law, so people didn't ever get close to the law.
Well, I was going to ask you about that too. I've heard, I don't know which minister it was, maybe in Steve Higginbotham, I'm not sure, but he talked about a target where the center of the target is the law, but they drew a line around that and then another line around that. So if I'm trying to paint a mental picture for you.
You're going to be safer than you have to be. But really, one of the worst things about the Pharisees is how they were actually keeping other people out of the kingdom, as Jesus describes it. There again in Matthew 23, verse 13, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut off the kingdom of heaven from people, for you do not enter yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in." They actually are using all of their power and influence to discourage people from following Jesus, not sincerely in seeking after the truth themselves, but they would put people out of the synagogue. I told you they were the ones that you should associate in your mind with the synagogue. That's where their sphere of influence and power really was. And so they cast somebody out of the synagogue. That really affects daily life for the Jewish person if they're following Jesus. So, being a stumbling block to somebody else, it's one thing to be lost yourself, but to cause other people to be lost is, I guess that's one of the worst things that we can do.
I don't know if we've talked about it either, but they kind of like the glory, right? They like to dress in a certain way. They like to be seen praying. They like to be...
Yeah, Matthew 23, verse 5 says, "But all their works they do to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garment."
So if we don't want to be Pharisees, we shouldn't be doing things to be seen by men. We shouldn't... I don't know what you're doing.
My eyes are tired.
Okay. Alan's holding his eyes open.
Sorry.
Apparently my comment is so riveting, he's having to physically open his eyes. But
Well, he was trying to make you be seen by men. He's the man
Well, I guess so.
that's trying to see you there.
I guess so. But anyhow, if that's what the Pharisees are doing, then we don't need to do that.
Right. It's all about the appearances to them. It's all about the position and the honor and the respect that they get for the way they dress, for the flowery way that they say their prayers, for all of those sorts of things. That's why Jesus calls them the whitewashed tombs, because it's all about that outward appearance without actually cleaning the heart. And so if somebody calls you a Pharisee, they're implying that you're corrupt and dead inside spiritually. And that's a very offensive thing to do. And
Would they also think that you're judgmental? You're
sure.
being judgmental, rather.
Probably so, which is ironic because they would be judgmental in calling you a Pharisee.
So we shouldn't be throwing around labels and terms and words. We should just be reflecting Christ to the best of our ability and as much as people allow us to.
Yeah, give people the benefit of the doubt. Assume that they're coming to their position from sincerity and they have a different background, they have a different perspective, but that doesn't mean that they're inherently insincere. Some people are, but give them the benefit of the doubt to start with.
Or they're not trying to be wrong.
Right.
They're not. I don't get up every day and think, "Hey, I'm going to mess all this up or be wrong on this point."
Mm-hmm. And there is something in that, too, about when somebody has established a certain amount of prestige and position because of their religious teachings and beliefs, it can be very hard for them to honestly evaluate those things, because for them to come out and change in a significant way what they believe or teach, it is going to cost them reputation. It may cost them a job if they're a minister of some kind. There's a heavy price to pay. So it's very difficult for religious leaders to make sincere changes. I think it's one of the things that held the Pharisees back.
Even after coming to know the truth. And
Mm-hmm.
and I made a note here to myself that I wanted to bring this up at the end, or next, is I won't tell you his name, but I read a quote here in this article that talks about if there are people who belong in this category, modern-day Pharisees, like you've already talked about, we will recognize them by their fruit, Matthew 12, 33 through 37. And Wes says they will be those who are intentionally trying to fool people into believing they are righteous when in reality they are living secret, immoral lives. And this week I saw a little video that popped up on Facebook where you get those reels, you get those little videos they try to get you to click on. And there was a famous, well-known televangelist who had pretty much, and there was some investigative reporting about his finances. Mm-hmm. And anyway, I Googled him, and there's been a lot of controversy, and most of it centers around his political connections and financial exuberance. But anyway, that's another podcast too.
We did that podcast kind of. We did the prosperity gospel podcast like a year ago.
And this guy would fall into that prosperity category. Owning a couple, multi-million-dollar jets and flying around the country. And actually, in his interview I watched, he said that when he was pressed on the point, he was sincere. He looked right into the reporter and he said, it takes a lot of money to do what we do. And So,
I bet it does.
And I was kind of taken aback. And he did have cuffs on his sleeve. He had some cuff links too, Daniel.
Right.
He was off the cuff too.
Yeah.
And but I think about modern day Pharisees. That hypocritical lifestyle. And I can imagine the message that guy tries to preach. That sacrifice for Christ, but I'm getting into my Learjet as I wave goodbye to you, kind of thing.
Right. I heard one of those guys say in a television discussion, with a straight face. I don't know how he said it with a straight face, but he was actually expressing the idea that you can't fly a commercial because you just can't pray among all those people.
I think we're talking about the same guy.
Probably
Daniel.
are.
When Joe hits
don't call his name.
When he hits his stop button, we're going to compare notes here. I know exactly. We've talked about the same guy.
Probably so.
But I guess for me, and I guess to circle back around, I go back to where I started with the dear listener's question is, how are Sadducees and Pharisees impacting our lives today? And I think we've done a pretty good job of trying to make that connection, that case. So I'll let you all kind of.
Right.
Well, before you go into your spiel, Daniel,
yeah,
one of you guys said, "Cross your I's and dot your T's." And
appreciate you bringing that up in case our dear listener missed it. That's kind of a comical scene. You can picture us sitting around here, our with our eyes crossed.
I had my eyes wide open. That's why I was trying to open mine.
Yeah.
I guess crossing your eyes and dotting your T's might actually be appropriate talking about the Pharisees because it's paying attention to the details and getting them wrong.
Yeah, you did that on purpose. That's right.
Sure, we can retroactively pretend like that was on. That was the point I was making the whole time. I can't believe you missed that, really. So anyway, in conclusion, it's probably not helpful to call somebody a Pharisee. It's lazy, it's dismissive, it's insulting. It's not gonna. It doesn't make you seem any more right, or doesn't make you come across any better. And it certainly is not a kind thing to do toward the other person. So, with all that said, I want to thank you, dear listener, for letting us be a part of your day. We want to thank the elders at the South Green Street Church of Christ for making soul training possible. I always want to thank my co-host, Al Jones over there, and Big Show Joe. And until next time, keep soul training.
Soul training. Time to practice what you preach. Ooh, yeah. Yes, we do. We've got soul training.
To learn more, you can email us at soultrainingpodcast@gmail.com, or you can write to us, P.O. Box 503, Glasgow, Kentucky, 42142. That's Soul Training.